I want to take a look at the Evans Gambit, and then I want to take a look at a few viewer games. I was thinking Evans Gambit tonight would be interesting. A lot of people play this. It's a good, it's basically a good club level opening. I see it a lot. I've played it against a few players who have gone on and been very high level players. But yeah, Evans Gambit tonight. Welcome, Aphelion. Thanks for joining the stream. Thanks for being here. But yeah, so I was thinking Evans Gambit tonight. Evans Gambit is one of a more, it's a more playable opening. Basically, it involves, basically white sacrificing a pawn, and very objectively, it's the best. The Gambit opening is best if accepted. So that's good. Good to hear. Good to hear, Aphelion. But yeah, so basically, with this analysis, I think that b4. So b4 is the Evans Gambit move. And one thing that's important to kind of know about this, analysis is that this opening really should be accepted. The bishop really should take b4. On bishop takes b4, I think probably c3 and d4 are the way for white to best play it. But yeah, so we've gone over it a few times, but I wanted to really do an in-depth look, give it a good solid 40-45 minutes, and take a look kind of at the intricacies here. The first fork here is by far bishop takes b4 is better than bishop to b6. In terms of the eval, bishop to b6 and white's up by about half a pawn. Bishop takes b4 and black's up by about half a pawn. So with that big a difference in eval, I think it's pretty imperative that you play d4 as opposed to bishop to b6. Otherwise, white's just gained space on the queen side. So we're going to assume that black plays the correct move. And by the way, if black does play bishop to b6, you can just comfortably play moves like, you can play moves like c3 and have basically a huge space advantage on the queen side. White has a very favorable eval, and things will be going well. This is comfortable. Better for white is considered to be castles, but overall there's almost no move here that is really problematic. a4 too provides a tactic with a5. Knight takes b4, a5. And here white's in pretty good shape. So a5, bishop to c5, c3, knight c6, and then castles. But basically white has a huge space advantage. Now he has the opportunity to play bishop to a3. So you really just shouldn't be worried about bishop to b6 being played. It's just a comfortable, it's a comfortable situation for white. And bishop takes b4 is really the line that the white needs to worry about more. Bishop takes b6, and you just have a positional advantage. So here, bishop takes b4. Now c3 is by far the correct move. If you look at the eval here, or you look at the opening book here, c3 is played in almost 100% of cases. And now there's basically, it looks like there's about 4 different moves that black can play. Bishop to a5, bishop to e7, bishop to d6 as the number 4, and bishop to c5. I want to go through all of these. So let's go through them. Let's go through them one by one and just see kind of what the play is. It's d4 basically. On bishop to d6, d4. On bishop to c5, d4 is still better than castles, but castles is more popular, so still d4. Hey Amet, how's it going? Bishop to e7, d4, and bishop to a5, still d4. So pretty much regardless, you play c3 and then d4 on the next move. So that is true in all four of the options that black can play. Let's look at them. Bishop to a5 and d4 here. This is interesting. Here's the only case where white can't immediately take back on d4. But black's main options here are c takes d4. D6 is slightly worse for black, but pawn takes d4 is the most challenging move for black in this case. Here, white castles, and black again has multiple options. d6, pawn takes c3. Pawn takes c3. Knight to e7, bishop to b6, and knight to f6. All of those are acceptable options for black. None of them will lead to an advantage for black. In this situation, basically white has gambited a pawn, but will have good attacks from the bishop on a3, trying to cut off this king from castling, and way better center control. So this is a case where white does actually have a sufficient, yeah. So here, you know, even though this c3 pawn is pinned, right? I'm at so d4, pawn takes d4, and this pawn is pinned on c3. But then you castle out of it, and then black has a few different options. D6 and then pawn takes d4. That's one option. Or d takes c3 and then queen to b3. In the queen to b3 line, now this f7 pawn is getting threatened. White is also, you know, basically white's going to end up in a situation where he's down by 2 pawns for this gambit, but he's going to have something that looks almost like a Danish gambit here. He's going to have big threats along both the diagonal running from a2 to g8 and the one running from a1 to h8. He's going to play knight takes c3 pretty soon, and then play bishop to b2 after that. So this is basically the Danish gambit, you know, when push comes to shove. This has gotten, you know, this, you know, it's a little bit different than the Danish gambit because black has some counters in development. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Ahmet. It's a Danish gambit. So yeah, so this is basically that, that type of structure. So that's what's interesting about this Evans gambit is it basically transposes into that. So here, queen to f6 is the most popular. E5, queen to g6, knight takes c3, knight to e7, bishop to a3, going on this diagonal. And, you know, white in terms of eval is just about equal. Having gambited 2 pawns, white's position is so so good and so aggressive that that it's equal. And given that white is the attacker in this situation, it probably is even better for white because white actually has practical compensation here. You know, again, at a certain level, playing gambits tends to be happen less and less often. So so if you manage to play a gambit and get into an equal position in a situation like this, you'll actually have a lot of practical compensation. And white is way ahead in development. You're absolutely right, Ahmet. This is going to be big. There's going to be threats on c7 that are going to be important for white. White can play rook to d1. White can play rook to e1. And yeah, white is really far ahead in development here. Enough to offset for the value of 2 pawns. Like if you look at the eval here is completely equal, even though white is 2 pawns down. So overall, really interesting. White might have threats trying to trap this queen. That could potentially be an idea. But yeah, black's going to try to castle here. I would be very surprised if he doesn't castle on the next move. So castles, rook a d1, b5. B5 is a little weird. B5 is the main line here, but B5 immediately gives back that pawn. I'm not sure how good that is. I think here, something like A6, knight D5, knight takes, bishop takes. I don't know. I feel like this will sort of slide towards black's eval. I feel like trading pawns here is probably, you know, probably bad for white in general. But let's see. So knight D5, rook takes D5. And then on bishop to b6, then what happens? Bishop to d3. Bishop to d3, queen to g4. h3. Queen to f4. This is a complicated line. We're going to go back in a second just to see kind of what happened here, but rook to e1, and basically this rook's going to come to e4 and have really strong threats on h7. So black's king safety is getting compromised here. So yeah, let's look at this. I'm actually pretty curious. Black has a few different options here. By far the most popular is b5, but yeah, a6 and rook e8 are also there. But this quick development is enough to provide, you know, basically equality for white, and white's going to have a lot of attacking chances. Is it good to sacrifice a pawn on e4 to go to rook g5? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think basically, yes. I think if white can, I hope I'm answering the question right, but like, I think that if white can get to like, you know, rook to d3 and then, or rook to d4 and then the rook over to the king side here. Yeah, let's take a look. Sacrifice the pawn on e4. But yeah, just that in general, like, this, you know, this situation, so b4, bishop takes b4, and then c3, and then a bunch of different options. Yeah, no, I just want to make sure, I want to make sure that know what you mean. But yeah, b4, bishop takes b4, c3, and then bishop to a5. Pretty much regardless, though, you really should be playing d4 on move 6 of the Evans Gambit, regardless. So d4, e takes d4, castles, and d takes c3, queen b3, and e5. But the big thing here is that white has this huge lead in development, and what he's going to do next is he's going to play like rook to d1 and try to get the rook over to the king side. Threats from like g3. Yeah, this is all theory. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, this is pretty well examined stuff, to be honest. In this situation, you've basically got still 21 games here. Castles, and then white has choices. Rook to ad1 is one, knight to e2 is one, but white's about to launch an attack on the king side here. This is how this is going to go. White has basically gambited 2 pawns, and it sort of ensures a sustained advantage. First, white had that early attack, which is pretty superficial on f7, but yeah, rook ad1, exactly. Good point, Matt. Rook ad1, then rook to d3, then like rook to g3 or rook to h3. These are moves that white will play later in this game, and it'll be pretty dangerous for black when he actually does this. So rook to d1 I think is a good idea. Yeah, so rook ad1 is the most popular move in the opening book. I like it. On b5, knight takes b5 is an opportunity. Also, bishop to d3 is an opportunity. Main line is bishop to d3. Let's look at the eval. Main line, bishop to d3. This seems to secure like an advantage for white, which is good. So basically, white here forces the queen to h5. And then, with knight to e2, knight to g3, lots of threats of the knight on the queen. Hey, welcome, Jen. Thanks for joining the stream. Yeah, so we were looking at basically this theory, and everyone should thank Jen for creating all those awesome emojis. I think they're great, yeah, Jen was super nice to make them. Let's see. Jen is here. Jen is here, and she made all the emotes for us. So that is cool. I still haven't figured it out, but I want to figure out how to put like the sunglasses on the emotes. I might not be able to do it while I'm streaming, but the sunglasses on the emotes, that's where it really starts getting cool. Like, can we put emotes? Oh wait, actually, can you guys see this one? You guys don't have that one, do you? I think I've got I can put the secret emote, but I'm not sure anyone else can. But Jen also made the and Caitlin is also here. But yeah, that is the secret emote. We only have space for 4, so I would ideally I wouldn't make any of the emotes secret, but yeah. Anyways, I may be the only person who can put that one, which is pretty silly, but whatever. Knight to e2, knight to g3, and white's looking pretty solid. So anyways, well, Jen made it. Jen made all the emotes. It was very nice of her to do it, but I think I might be the only user who can use that last one. So yeah, so basically, we've seen on the bishop a5 line, good opportunities for the queen after pawn takes, bishop a5 line, d4, pawn takes, castles, pawn takes, queen to b3, and white sacrifices 2 pawns to get something that looks something like the Danish, and will end up being a sustained advantage for the whole game. Yeah, exactly. That is the perfect emote, Jen. Yeah. But yeah, they are pretty funny. So I'm all about the emotes. So it was very nice of Jen to make them all. And let's see. Yeah, let's take a look at some of the other lines. So we've now looked at the bishop to a5 line. Let's look at the bishop to c5 line. This one's a little different because even though d4 is given as the best eval here, if you look at the evals, d4 has the one that that still leaves white in positive territory. D4 is still not the most popular. So like if we look at and we do the most popular move, castles, I think it'll evaluate that as good but not great. I think the maybe it doesn't say best, but I think best here is actually still D4. So D4 on move 6 I think is always pretty comfortably correct. D4, E takes D4, and then white castles. White is not afraid to give up this C3 pawn. That's the theme that's common in the Evans Gambit. Giving up this pawn on C3. White offers that opportunity frequently to turn it basically from the Evans into the Danish, and black is usually not the best off if he accepts it. On D6, C takes D4, bishop to B6. Now I would say, bishop B2 is playable, D5 is playable, and knight C3. I'm leaning towards knight C3. Let's look at the eval. Yeah, knight C3 looks like the best according to the eval, so I think knight to C3 is right. With this, white has basically sacrificed one full pawn and has a much better center and quick development. So this is another way that the Evans Gambit can go. This is the line out of bishop to C5. Again, the move 6 for white is D4. There's basically no bishop move after C3 that white doesn't play D4 against. So D4 and then bishop to B6, and then or C takes D4, bishop to B6, knight to C3. White leads in development. Still an opening theory for sure. Black has a bunch of different options here. They include knight to A5. They include bishop to G4. They include knight to F6. Let's just say knight to A5. In this situation, you don't give up the bishop. This bishop is very important, and you can't really trade off the pieces. Yeah, that's right, Aphelion. That's actually exactly how I would describe it. C3, bishop somewhere, D4. You're basically pre-moving D4 on move 6, and that's pretty comfortable. It's good to know that, just in terms of theory. Again, if you want to really, if you want to play the Evans Gambit, you probably should know theory further in through move 6. It's water, but bishop to D3, knight to E7, bishop to B2, castles, and here, H3 is one. But white has a big center. This is D4 and E4, and white's going to have a big, basically big developmental advantage. White needs to come up with an attack quickly, though, because he is down a pawn, and he is going to need to make that pawn, that pawn sacrifice worthwhile. Main line here, D5. Okay, this isolates the queen on A5, I guess. Knight to G6, knight to E2, C5, queen to D2. And basically, white's looking fine. Bishop to G4 could be an opportunity for black, but honestly, this is sort of I guess I would say this is a less favorable line to white. Let's just see on C3, which of the evals are considered to be the best. Bishop to A5 is considered to be better than bishop to C5, I think. But bishop to C5 seemed to equalize pretty quickly. So bishop to C5, D4, and E takes D4, castles, D6, C takes, bishop to B6, and opportunities for white. Knight to C3, D5. In terms of looking at this eval, knight to C3 appears to be the best. But I was sort of impressed by how quickly that situation equalized. Looking at this situation, I think white is probably better for the pawn, but again, the engine analysis here is a bit superficial. It's a little bit better for white, and black has the opportunities knight A5, H6, but say knight A5, bishop to D3, knight to E7. White's doing fine here. Ideas include like bishop to G5 could be okay. Bishop to G5 seems to be preferred to bishop to B2. This is kind of interesting. And looking at this eval, let's sort of see where the eval takes us on this. The opening book is definitely pointing us towards this bishop to B2 line out of bishop to C5 on knight A5. But there's a few different options here. And the engine is pointing towards H3 as well as bishop to G5. I don't know. H3 is in the opening book, but pretty far down it. We're getting to the end of where the opening book actually is here. But bishop to b2 appears to be the book line, but not really preferred by the engine. After bishop to b2, which the engine I'm sure considers to be slow, black castles queenside, and the computer gives the suggestion of an earlier h3. This is kind of interesting. I guess that this development doesn't really help. It runs into these two pieces. But again, it is sort of counterintuitive to not want to develop here. So this is a formation that can occur out of that bishop to c5. Let's see what happens with bishop to e7. Since we've looked at we've looked at 2 of the 4 now. So bishop to e7, again, pre-move your d4, and with that pre-moved d4, most common, knight to a5. So knight a5, and now here you have kind of an interesting tactic. It looks like knight takes e5 is an option. I'm kind of curious because the engine doesn't prefer it. Engine says bishop to e2 and not to trade off the bishop. Tough situation though, to be honest. I guess I would probably lead towards what the engine. So looking at this analysis, knight takes e5 and bishop to e2 are about equally popular in the opening book. Bishop to d3 is a third option. I guess I would say, yeah, probably it's better to not trade off that bishop on c4. You do get that extra pawn, so in this case, white's equalized materially completely, but I think positionally speaking, white's down a little bit after knight takes c4. So knight takes c4, knight takes c4. Options can include d5, but basically white is, at least materially equalized. His pawn structure's probably better. His center control is certainly better. So this is an interesting Evans Gambit line as well. So here bishop takes b4, and then c3, bishop b7, d4, and then but what's interesting is that the book line is not e takes d4, in which case white plays e takes d4 and is up by a little bit. Instead, the book line is actually on this d4 out of bishop b7. Book line is knight to a5. So on knight to a5, white has to choose to either move the bishop back, in which case white will be down a pawn after pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, or he can choose to get the material back to even and accept a small positional disadvantage. This is a tough choice. Not sure which is better here, but knight takes c4. At least equalizes the material, and now white has to choose between bishop to a3, castles, knight to d2, but some moves for white. I don't know. I think this is interesting. Now here d5, e takes d5, queen takes d5. There's a whole line coming off of this. Basically queen to d8. Now this has some aspects of the Scandinavian, which is particularly weird. But yeah, we can just go through this. Castles, knight f6, c4, castles, knight to c3. Overall, weird. This is an unusual position. In terms of eval, it looks about equal. But yeah, on this bishop to e7, d4 and then knight to a5 provides a tactic for black. So yeah, let's look at the other lines that come off of knight to d, or so basically opening line here is knight to a5. And then, the most common is knight takes e5. Second most common is bishop to e2. In this case, this knight's a little bit dislocated over here. The engine thinks this is better than knight takes c4, and even with the pawn taking, which is the most common response. So e takes d4, and then the real move here is queen takes d4. This is counterintuitive. I'm surprised that that's the opening line here. By the way, Evans Gambit, it's been many years since I've played the Evans Gambit, to be honest. Over the board, it doesn't happen that much against me. People don't play Gambits against Masters, which is the lamest thing. I feel like people should play Gambits more often against Masters. I think you can definitely catch Masters off guard by playing aggressive Gambit sometimes. I don't know this theory super well. So queen takes d4, d6, d5 are options for black, and d6. Hey, there's Jen.
Hi!
Jen is here.
We're on an ice cream hunt.
And Jen and Caitlin are here, and they're getting ice cream.
What flavor should we get? Tell us,
No,
Internet!
Yeah.
No, I'm gonna take whatever I want.
Are you guys staying here, or are you guys gonna go out?
Well, first we're going to the freezer, and we're gonna see how that goes.
Okay. Cool, good stuff. Anyways, what's interesting about this is d6 and d5 are options for black. But yeah, so d6 appears to be the most popular. Queen takes g7, bishop to f6, queen to g3, and black again has a few options here. Queen to e7, knight to e7, knight to c6, and bishop to e6. All look okay for black. So queen e7, castles, queen takes, rook e1, king f8. Interesting. Basically, the further that this goes into it, it looks like this is the more the more favorable this is to white. But yeah, interesting situation. And we've gone through 3 of the 4 characteristics, or basically 3 of the 4 options in the Evans Gambit for black. So bishop takes b4, c3, bishop to d6, and then again doing our pre-move 6d4. 6d4. This is this is interesting. The line that this is actually, by the way, the line that I play against the Evans Gambit. I rarely see it, to be honest, but this is the line that I play. So this probably has the most immediate impact on what I should be learning. So on d4 for white, knight to f6, castles, and then options castle or queen e7. Let's say castles here, rook e1, h6. This ends up in a situation that's a little bit better for white, but overall this seems to be a pretty solid way to play this as black. It creates fairly limited vulnerabilities. On bishop to d6, the center's not really compromised. White's able to get off of the direct attacks, and pawn takes e5 can be met at any point with either probably knight takes e5. In which case knight takes, bishop takes, and that there's no advantage there for white. So yeah, I like bishop to d6, to be honest. This is how I play the the Evans Gambit as black. But yeah, bn d2, rook e8, queen to b3, queen e7, and overall white's looking fine. I don't know. It's a game basically. This game has slightly different characteristics in that the e5 pawn is very well reinforced. It's not voluntarily moved by black, so I guess that's probably the biggest differentiating characteristic out of the bishop to d6 lines. In the bishop to d6 lines, black doesn't play pawn takes d4, like ever. So black just ends up basically a pawn up without advancing his pawn on e5 any further. There can be fights and trades over the pawn on e5. But black never actually moves any pieces. So black just upped the pawn the pawn on the b file that he won. So basically the b4 pawn. That was the pawn that white is losing by right now, and black's putting up a pretty solid pretty solid defense is what I'd say. So it's sort of up to whatever people want to do in terms of this. There's 4 options. We can take a look at some of the options off of bishop to c5. I think bishop to c5 is probably the most interesting. Having played against the Danish Gambit, or played against the Evans Gambit for many years, I play bishop to d6. I think that bishop to d6 provides the solidest response. But again, it's not as if this opening is refuted. It's not as if there's anything dangerous here. On c3, bishop to d6. The only thing about this that's particularly notable in the theory is that you don't move or take on d4. So d4, leave the pawn on e5. Play like knight f6 is playable, queen to e7 is playable, castles, rook e1, I don't know, queen e7 or h6 are both fine. Say queen e7. But black is comfortable. There's just no issues. This feels cramped for black, but there's no actual tactical problems that occur from this. So yeah, interesting. This is sort of what that d6 looks like, or bishop to d6 looks like. The lines that I'm sort of curious in, and where I can probably learn a bit myself, is lines with bishop to c5. So bishop takes b4, c3, bishop to c5, castles. Castles is not the move that I'm proposing. I'm proposing d4 pre-move on every opportunity. Let's just make this simple. Let's just say, regardless of what happens, pre-move d4 on move 6. So d4, e takes d4, and then castles here basically is this is an early castles. In terms of Yeah, so castle's here. Do you castle on so c3 and then bishop to c5 and then do you castle on move 6? Interesting. I mean, it is the most popular move, by the way, is castling. Um, yeah, so I don't think there's anything wrong with castling there. I picked d4 over castles just because of this difference in eval. It probably, realistically, they probably transpose into the same thing. I don't think black's going to play anything that will restrict you from playing d4. Let's check out the castles move. I'm proposing 6d4, but let's look at castles just so we know that line as well. Then d6, then d4. Realistically, this is the same. I mean, this is the same line. So, hey, thank you very much for the follow up, Pam. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Thank you for being here. Bishop to c5 is the only move that you don't play d4. Yeah, no, right. So I'm proposing 6d4 just as a pre-move to keep everything simple. But there are probably some intricacies that come with 6 castles there against bishop to c5 that could be good that I'm missing out on. I'm just, here when I say pre-move bishop to c4, or sorry, pre-move d4, I'm going off of the eval of a weak engine. This engine is not a particularly strong engine, so maybe I should do some more review before I say the early 6d4. We can just look at the castles line for a second. I'm pretty sure this is just going to transpose into the same line with that early d4. But d4, e takes d4, c takes d4, bishop to b6. This is kind of the main line, Evans Gambit line. This is fine. But yeah, overall, Evans Gambit, look, I mean, if you're looking for an opening that isn't refuted, that gives you pretty good tactical compensation, or practical compensation, but doesn't lead to you being down, Evans Gambit is a pretty good choice. This ends up being up about, this is up about quarter of a pawn, white is comfortable here. So I think rook to e1, knight to c3, bishop to d2, e5. All of this should be pretty good for white, I think we're in pretty good place here. Interesting. So yeah, knight c3 is possible, d5 is possible. Here, I don't know. This is sort of the same juncture that we were looking at before. Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly believe you. I don't know this line extremely well, to be honest. I don't play the Evans Gambit as white, although this opening, although the evals on these make me more likely to want to play it, to be honest. I like the practical compensation that white's getting here, but yeah, I play the bishop to d6 line, so these bishop to c5 lines are relatively new to me. So here, knight to c3, white has reasonably good development, knight to a5, and then white has choices here. Bishop to g5 is one, bishop to b5 is another. The most common is bishop to d3. I don't know, let's look at bishop to g5, that's kind of interesting. Bishop to g5, f3, bishop to f4, and then knight takes c4, queen a4, queen to d7, queen takes c4. Looks at the eval there. White is again fine. This is kind of interesting. This line, white's getting basically a favorable eval even after having traded off the good squared bishop. Probably because this f6 is a little bit restricting. So basically in this situation, yeah. No, I agree. I think this is actually a pretty interesting line. So this knight c3 line, knight a5, bishop to g5 is interesting because the queen doesn't want to move. And then if the queen doesn't want to move, then then f6 is the best option, right? So f6 is probably, f6 is basically the mainline response. Knight e7 also has a few lines here, but f6 is probably the mainline response. And on the mainline response, white plays bishop to f4, then gives up his good squared bishop for that knight, but then basically gets to make a lot of plays later with e5, probably after rook to e1. So let's just look at, some of the lines here. G5, bishop G3, bishop E6, queen A4, bishop D7. But yeah, white's in pretty good shape. And yeah, things are looking solid. I was hoping for an earlier E5, but yeah, that is a really interesting line. a little bit. The bishop c5 lines are the lines that I know the least, to be honest. So that is where we should where we should spend some time. c3, bishop to c5, and then castles is the main line. Sure, castles d6, d4, e takes d4, e takes d4, bishop to b6. I would take this position as white any day, by the way. This looks really good for white. h3, knight to c3 looks good. Bishop to g5 is a threat that could be played. Rook to e1. A lot of plans play very easily for white in this situation. So yeah, the engine is, let's look at d5. We were already looking at knight to c3, but let's look at the d5 lines. On d5, knight a5, bishop to b2, and that's pretty interesting. So basically, with this, this main line, and this is the main line. This is the #1 most popular move. It's not given at the best eval. Good question, Ahmet. Let me just look at the schedule. Schedule is, you know what I should do, Ahmet? Now that I'm thinking about it, I should have like a sidebar. Like I need to come up with a better frame on my my thing. I should come up with a sidebar that has like the times and what we're doing. Cause like I have, it's always on the Discord, but I should think of like I should put like a frame of the thing. And by the way, Ahmet, I don't think your game is tonight. Yeah, no, yeah, so it's not tonight, but I'm thinking, yeah, if we got like a frame and then we could put the schedule of each lesson as it was going, that seems to be like a good idea. And I don't think that, yeah, or have a command for the schedule. Yep, I like it. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, so I think that would make that question a lot, or that would give a lot better answer to that question, Ahmet, because it's a very fair question. And but I can tell you that unfortunately, Ahmet, your game is not tonight's stream. I think it might be tomorrow morning. I can see if I can find it for you, but yeah, Ahmet, sorry, it's the Ahmet, the game is tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern. Yeah, or we could, even then we could just have like a slot of like 6 slots on the side, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I've switched over to doing 3 slots of lessons and then 3 slots of games. It's made the games get kind of backlogged, but if you want to get something, if you want to get a lesson in, the lesson ideas section of the Discord, we can get to the lessons almost immediately. Like if you guys start making recommendations on the lesson ideas section, we can get to those. So right now what it looks like is the games are all backlogged, but the lessons, there's still plenty of space. So if there's any lessons that you guys specifically want to see, feel free to just make those suggestions, and those will get in almost immediately. So, if you make a lesson suggestion, it'll probably get in within a day or two. But the games are backlogged, so I don't know. Switching over was a little bit tricky, but we're sort of working out the kinks here. Anyways, it's interesting stuff. But yeah, I think maybe that frame would be a good idea. That would make life better. Yeah. If there's a specific Jen is here. But yeah, if there's anything that you guys want to do in terms of like someone suggested the Evans Gambit, so I thought the Evans Gambit was a great idea. If you guys want to see a specific opening, if you guys want to see a specific end game, yeah, it's New York, so it's not a huge apartment or anything, but yeah, if you guys want anything, any specific type of lesson, if you guys want to learn about good lines in your opening repertoire or something like that, those suggestions will get in very quickly at this point. It's just the games are a bit backlogged since we cut the number of I cut the number of slots, 4 games in half. But yeah, anyways, that's that. But yeah, your game is 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, Ahmet. But yeah, so in this situation, this is the bishop to c4 with castles in d4, castles d6 and d4. I think white's, I don't know, white's position looks really solid. Yeah, no, it's really expensive for way too little space. That's how New York City works. But yeah, d5, knight to a5, bishop. What's important here though is that on d5. So white has two options here. White's options here are knight c3 or d5. If knight c3, then then black plays knight a5, and then white plays bishop to d3. But on d5, the knight plays to a5. But the issue here is that basically white has seriously weakened the value of his light squares here. So the move actually for white now is bishop to b2, threatening on this diagonal. And then this diagonal, this bishop on b2 facing g7, this ends up being pretty solid for, this is pretty solid for white. By the way, in this situation, what's weird is that the move is actually knight to e7. Hey, I didn't know you lived in Toronto. You know, I'm actually taking a class at University of Toronto right now, Matt. I'm taking a marketing class at University of Toronto. It's cool. It's a cool school. But yeah, anyways, random thing. I didn't know you were in. I knew you were in Canada. I didn't know you were in Toronto. Yeah. Yeah. No, it is cool. Digital marketing. Which is a super interesting class too. So yeah, so bishop to b2 facing off against g7. On knight takes c4 here, bishop takes g7, and white's better for sure. This is a good combo. So so knight to e7 instead is the move to play. Bishop to d3, castles, knight to c3, knight to g6, knight to e2, and yeah, white is fine. Knight to e2, c5, queen d2, f6. But yeah, comfortable stuff. White is fine. This c5 lines, bishop to c5 lines tend to involve bishop to b6 and knight to e5. Probably all Evans lines do. Let's look at the knight a5 lines. So d4, bishop to b6, castles, e takes, d6, and then, but yeah, d5 will always lead to knight a5. Knight c3 will also probably always lead to knight a5. Bishop to d3, knight to e7. Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that. No, for me it's a remote course. Here, I'll show you which one it is. It's the one I'm taking is I can show you here. One second. Just since we're here, I mean, I don't really. I'm taking this one. But yeah, that's the one. That's the one I take. But it's been great actually. Even though it's all remote, but. Anyways, interesting. I've been to Toronto. I've been to Toronto a couple times, but I've never been to the campus or anything. So yeah, bishop to b2, castles, d5, knight to g6, knight to e2, and this is interesting. But yeah, cool stuff. Knight to g3, queen to d2. I don't know. But anyways, that pre-move of e4 gives a good sense, and on that d6, d4 and d6 line, you can play knight to c3 or d5. Both will lead to black playing knight to a5, and then there's going to be opportunities to play bishop to b2. Hey, welcome, Lauren. How are you? How's it going? Thanks for joining the stream. But yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, I think that basically wraps up the 4 lines. The one that's a little bit different is the bishop to d6 line that I play. Yeah, it's going. But yeah, so that bishop to d6 line, that one's a little bit different because on bishop to d6, you basically are not playing or black is not playing e takes d4, and that's what makes it different than most of the other, basically in the other 3 main lines of the Evans Gambit. Black plays e5 takes d4, but yeah, on the bishop to d6 line, black holds the pawn at e5 and then kind of works his position sort of around it. So yeah, interesting theory. And if anyone wants to see theory for any other openings, just feel free to send them in the lesson ideas section. Yeah, no, I know the feeling. You know, it does get you definitely can like overplay. So yeah, I had that one day where I worked on the FIDE online arena. I definitely overplayed, and then the next day and actually, to be completely honest, since that day in the FIDE online arena, my chess has been, or my 1 minute chess has been a little bit off. I think I assume it'll go back, but yeah, I know the feeling well. Anyways, on to the games, the game analysis. Here we go. First one I think is from TK, but we will see. First one is from Determined Vision. All right. So Determined Vision is playing black here. So e4, e6, d4, d5. Black basically opts for, or white opts for this French exchange. Interesting. So French exchange, you know, there's a big debate about how drawish it is. It has the reputation of being extremely drawish, but I think that, you know, there are lines in it, like the Monte Carlo attack, that can lead to positions that are way less drawish than the French exchange is presented as. But yeah, so here there's opportunities. Knight to f3, bishop to d3, c4. Let's just see what they're named. That's what I'm sort of curious about, to be honest. So I know c4 is the Monte Carlo variation. Bishop to d3, that has no name, and knight to f3 also has no name. So yeah, no name is the main theme here, and yeah, it's kind of interesting. Two of them have no name, and one of them is not no name. So, anyways, c4, that c4 Monte Carlo variation, interesting. But yeah, knight to c3, okay. What happened in this game? Knight to c3, right? So knight to c3, knight to c6 makes sense. Black's not going to cause any problems by maintaining symmetry here. Knight to c3, by the way, is the fourth most common. This is yeah, no, I like that. I like those for sure. That Monte Carlo variation is really interesting. I've played it over the board for sure. Monte Carlo variation of the French exchange can be really fun in like you know, rapid, like game in 30 type games, because it will take your opponents. Your opponents can be very booked up on the French, and it'll take the French player and put them in a very open position, which they usually don't like to you know, like to play. So c4, yeah, is a cool line. But yeah, knight to c3 is actually not that common. It's probably not common for the same reason that knight to c3 and knight to c6 moves are not common in the queen's pawn openings. You know, knight to c3 is option number 5 here, and it really does slow down c2. c4 is a valuable resource for white in the French exchange. It's the only one that challenges d5 directly. So yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's right, Lauren. There are some really interesting ones. Cool. Yeah, no, we went over the Thomas Roja one this morning, but I do think we have another one coming up too, Aphelion. But yeah, so yeah, knight to c3 I think blocks in c2, so I don't think that's the best idea. On knight to c3, I'm thinking bishop to b4 probably is the best idea. This turns into a French defense winnower delayed exchange. Okay, that's a weird naming scheme, but yeah, I think that this move. So I would say white has voluntarily played knight to c3. Here, I think you probably shouldn't maintain the symmetry here. Bishop to b4 is probably correct. You know, in terms of looking at you know, moves here, Knight f6 is given as the best for black. That leads to equality. So I think that something that isn't knight to c6. It's not that you'll be behind. You're basically just playing symmetrically. But it's just knight to c3 and knight to c6 aren't great moves. The c pawn will provide too much of a resource to restrict with these early queenside knight moves. C5 will make a great challenge to d4. So, yeah, interesting. Yeah, there are some great classical games. I mean, I feel like tactical study and classical games kind of go together. Like, basically the tactical study, tactics were like a really key part of the classical chess games. So the classical chess games have appeal to the to basically basically they have appeal if you're a strong tactical player. I haven't tried like King's Gambit or that kind of stuff, but that kind of stuff tends to be pretty interesting. So yeah, anyways, knight to c3, knight to c6. So yeah, so playing like c5 or not playing your knight in front of the pawn here, I think that that ends up being better. So c5, bishop to b4. I think objectively speaking, those are probably better. Engine gives knight f6 as equality, so I think that that's probably a reasonable play. But nothing can go too terrible with nothing can go too terrible with the knight on c6 and the pawn on c7. Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, my main opinion on this topic is that what's helpful is basically learning a lot of tactics first. I feel like basically under 2000, like such a high percentage of games is determined by tactical play that it's sort of like with such a high percentage of games determined by tactical play, like it makes tactics and becoming an accurate tactical player who isn't hanging pawns or pieces. That is, yeah. So it's I like your thinking on that. Like it's sort of basically a proxy for that. Just getting that high level tactical play in first, I think is yeah, like romantic chess or whatever for sure. But yeah, so yeah, we're moving. Good point, Demet. Always happy to see. But yeah, for sure. Yeah, makes sense to me. I go from the angle of tactics training, but it's basically the same concept. In order to be a great romantic, like romantic classical chess type player, you need the strong tactics. That's a big part of the that's a big part of that early game. So yeah, that sort of leads you in the same direction. Anyways, knight to f3 here, knight to f6, bishop to b5, bishop to b4, and now the situation's pretty close to equal. Castles, bishop to f4, and we're pretty close to equality. Bishop takes c3 is probably playable. Black plays bishop to g4. I like this. I think this is a fine time to break symmetry here. Engine is proposing bishop takes c3, but yeah, bishop to g4 I think is good for black. I don't know. Maybe knight to e7, knight to g6 could be an idea. I'm sort of struggling to think of what the best play is. Knight e7. So I think what the engine's going for is knight e7, knight g6, and then bishop to g4. But I like bishop to g4 as a general thought. I mean, putting pressure on this knight could provide tactical opportunities for black later. On queen takes d3, bishop takes f3 anyways. Good play, good idea. Knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, and now black's up. So yeah, so that was big. So yeah, this basically here on bishop to g4, queen to d3, bishop takes f3. This situation ends up good for black. So queen d3, bishop takes, queen takes. The alternative for white here was g takes f3. But all this sort of started because of bishop to g4. This generates that error. Much better was bishop takes c6. Let's take a look at the engine line here. Bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, and then, I don't know, maybe then queen d3. But you need to basically, the error for white here was in not clearing the things off tactically. Queen to d3, and then the bishop, the resource of knight takes d4 is still there. What white needs to do if he wants to play queen to d3, he needs to play bishop to g4, or he needs to play bishop to g4, then bishop takes c6, pawn takes c6, and now queen to d3 can be played safely, and on bishop takes f3, queen takes f3, and there's no issues for white. But yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. I mean, I think that, yeah, studying older games is probably a reasonable way to play it. Yeah. Um, I mean, the real determinant, I sort of think in terms of, how quickly people can get to 2000 level tactical study. Like, it's those classical games, teach those positional concepts pretty well. And but they do have less established opening theory. They have less established ideas. So I do think at the end of the day, like, modern chess, the modern chess as played with computer assistance is like definitely the strongest. But I like your thinking on that, Lauren. Like, I think that is interesting. But yeah, I mean, objectively speaking. Yeah, but the old romantic games, those are fun, and like those are interesting, like, general concepts. So yeah, definitely at 1800 level they are kind of simple, so they are good ways to be like instructive. But I think again, like, the main concept, the main way that people get from like 1200 to 2000 is tactics. Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. So yeah, anyways, it's interesting. Yeah, I haven't thought of it from that perspective, but I do think that the classical chess, yeah, no, for sure, no, classical chess is really interesting. I think that if you can use classical chess as a way of getting people to like understand basic positions and basic tactics, then I do think that is pretty helpful. But I do think that those are the main concepts that lead people like out of like club level, is just good understanding of positional play and tactics. So going with those, yeah, no, but I mean, my point is basically that I think that the percentage of games that are determined by tactical errors under 2000 is like over 50%. Like it's some enormous percentage. So it's great. It's definitely great to get to understand, like, space advantage, center control, like positional advantages. But those things don't have that much utility if you can't actually like accurately play a game to a 2000 level. Like if you're you can basically nurture a space advantage, but if you kind of hang a pawn midway through it, it's sort of like it's just hard to play that way. So anyways, I'm big on tactics. I think everyone knows that I'm really big on tactics at this point. And Lauren's making an interesting point, which is that teaching classical chess might be a way to get people to take or to develop tactically, and to do that first. But I think that in terms of improving efficiently, that's the space that people neglect the most frequently. So I don't know. Anyways, in this situation, so let's look at this game. I want to take a look at this game. I think basically things I would change for black here. Maintaining symmetry is not a problem, but moving your knight to c6 and blocking in your c7 pawn, which could be a resource to you to attack the center, I don't think that's the strongest move. Strongest for black is given as knight f6 by the engine. I think that's probably correct. In terms of going through this game, bishop takes f3 gave you great tactical opportunity. Good job finding that and capitalizing on it. Bishop takes c3 I like as well. Engine's not so hot on bishop takes c3, but on bishop takes c3, you get white to have doubled isolated pawns. I can't think this is too terrible. And going into this late middle game, black looks fine. I mean, basically, has a better pawn structure, up a full pawn. Things are, pretty strongly in black's favor here. So I think there's not, there may be small inefficiencies here, but I'm not super worried about it. And then black ends up coming up with a pretty good way of like doubling his rooks on the 7th and winning the end game. So maybe there's opportunity, maybe there's a little bit more opportunity to improve here. I sort of went over this quickly, but there aren't really any big errors. So I would say knight to c7 or knight to c6 gets the c7 pawn stuck. Knight to c6 instead, or knight to f6 instead is preferred by the engine. I think that's objectively better. White makes an error with queen to d3, and then I don't know. Bishop takes c3. Knight e6 is getting suggested here. Knight to e6 can be cleanly played, threatening this bishop to f4 with tempo. Yeah, that it probably is better. I don't know. I mean, I like the thinking behind bishop takes c3, pawn takes c3. Giving white these doubled isolated pawns seems to be like a good plan. But yeah, knight to e6 probably can be played. But at the same time, queen takes c3 isn't play. All right, queen to c3 isn't playable. So I don't know. Knight e6 threatening f4. That's kind of interesting. I thought this is a fine exchange. The engine doesn't really like this, but I think that this makes intuitive sense to me. Rook to b8, queen to c5, b6, queen takes, rook to c8. And basically here, black's looking fine. No issues. Knight to e4. This, these pawns should be pretty easy for black to clip. He does. And then yeah, honestly, I like the way that black played this game. There's, I don't think there's that many. I mean, there's inefficiencies, but none of them really make, none of them really strike me as too terrible. This trade in general, basically here, knight to e6 here, and this knight on f, the knight is threatening f4. f4 needs to do something. I don't know, queen to f3, knight takes f4. Yeah, this doesn't strike me as a particularly large amount better than what was played. I guess here, knight takes, queen takes, and bishop to d6. Yeah, this doesn't seem much better to me, to be honest. I sort of like what happened in the game. Bishop takes c3 makes sense to me. Knight takes b5, and now things have simplified a lot. The engine is also not preferring knight takes b5 here. I think it's fine again. I think that getting white's bishop pairs off the board here, I think that generally seems like a good idea. So knight takes b4, queen takes b4, rook to b8, yeah, the eval seems to be moving towards equality here, but I don't see any problems. I don't know, b6 maybe, queen takes, rook to c8. This is fine for black. I don't think there's any issues here. So anyways, black clips all these pawns. They keep saying that these are inaccuracies. g6 is considered to be worse than rook to b8. Let's think about that for a second. Again, I'm not so worried about this. I feel like black has a better position, and black can just play rook to b2 if he needs to. But b6, rook to b7, rook to b2, and black is fine. Surprised that that's given a brilliancy, but okay, sure. Rook f8 is better. Rook to b1 here, okay. Then I would say rook to b8, maybe? I'm just thinking. I mean, it's a... yeah, Jen's good. She's in the other room. She was on the stream earlier tonight. But yeah, she's doing well. Uh, uh, she made all the emotes, which I made sure to thank her because the emotes are awesome. They are great, and yeah, it was very nice of her to make those. So always very appreciated. So yeah, Rook to E8 is yeah, Jen's emote. But I'm the only one who gets to post the special Jen emote. That's another one that Jen made, but I think I'm the only one who has access to it. So I don't know. But it was really nice of her to make them. So definitely great. Rook to D6, King to G7, Rook takes B6, and yeah, probably Rook to E2 here. Yeah, no, they're great. It was really nice. Jen does some great graphic design. I wouldn't recommend. What if you just copy and paste it? What happens if you copy the What happen? Can you copy and paste the Jen emote and then repaste it? What happens if you try that? I'm kind of like. Does it work? Like that's what I was wondering. Or does it? Oh, it doesn't work if you just like copy it and paste it. Ah, bummer. Yeah, no, hopefully I'll end up getting more spaces. I think if you get to enough average viewers, you can get the I think you can get to the the full, like, basically a larger array of things, but anyways, until that happens, I guess I have the the Gen emote. They're the special Gen emote. I forgot that's what I named it. That's actually really funny. But yeah, Jen was really nice, and she was nice enough to make all of those. So everyone should thank Jen for doing such a nice thing to contribute to the stream. And she's very supportive of the stream, which is always very appreciated. So yeah, in terms of improving this game, I think knight to c6, knight f6 was better, and knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, and bishop b6, and rook to c8. Interesting. Knight to e4. But yeah, I think black should be able to turn this into a win. I can nitpick a little bit in terms of efficiency. The engine seems to be doing a lot of that, but honestly, I think black played this in a pretty intuitive way. They even get a brilliancy point. So on move 23, black gets a brilliancy. That's always good. And yeah, I think black's converts on this solidly. Turns it into a win. Makes sense. So yeah, in terms of improving this game, honestly, I thought this was generally pretty good. The inaccuracies that the engine is giving you are things that seem fairly intuitive in terms of closing out this game, or like rook to b8 here, given an inaccuracy. What did they want you to do? Queen to c8, I guess, was better. I guess queen to c8 doesn't lose the c pawn in the same way, or trade the c pawn in the same way. So maybe that is a little better. Like queen to c8 and you can play c6 maybe. So I guess that's a little better. The main idea is I think that the accuracy score is surprisingly low for black in this game. I thought black played pretty well. I wouldn't have done knight to c6. I think the c5 pawn provides too valuable a resource to restrict. And then rook to b8 appears there appears to be an improvement here with queen to c8. With queen to c8, there's no way for white to win the c7 pawn, as happened in the game. And so on queen to c8, basically the defense on a7 is retained. So queen to c5 and c6, and basically a7 is fine. So anyways, interesting stuff, and yeah, looking good. Yeah, solid. So I think instead queen to c8 as opposed to rook to b8, and that played out pretty well for black. Interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it, Determined Vision. I thought you played pretty solidly. And let's go on to the next one. Knight c6 and queen to c8. So 20. Move 2 knight f6 as opposed to knight c6, and move 13 queen to c8 as opposed to rook to b8. Cool. This is Natif's game. Thank you very much for sending the game, Natif, and thank you very much, Determined Vision, for sending all those games. Really appreciate it. Thanks for helping out and contributing material for the stream. It's always great. Queen to f6. Okay, this is interesting. So queen to f6 is kind of an interesting situation. We've already exited basically the opening theory at this point. The main thing to do when your opponent plays a move like queen to f6 is two things. Be tactically accurate. So if your opponent makes superficial threats, make sure that you're on top of 100% of the superficial threats that can occur. So that's something to consider. And then the second one is basically develop normally. When black plays a move like queen to c6, he is causing himself developmental issues. Basically, this bishop can't go along this line if this queen is in the way, and more importantly, this knight can't go to f6 if the queen is on f6. So what you do as white is you develop in a very natural way, whereas black is forced to develop in a somewhat unnatural way, and you can capitalize basically by exerting pressure with your more effectively developed pieces. So knight to c3, knight to e7, d3, and white is just fine. White is fine against black, and ideas include a6, but white has this good solid development. Bishop to g5 could be a potential idea for white, but overall here I think all is sort of well, and you don't really have to worry about too much. D3, knight to d5, c3, b4. But yeah, yes, and that's true. And again, good point. Good point, Lauren. One of the things that's good about queen to f6 is that it provides an indirect defense on d4. I'll show you where I actually play it. I play it against the Ruy Lopez sometimes. Let's look at the eval. I bet the eval will be fairly unfavorable to this idea. But yeah, bishop to b5, a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop to b3. Okay, so this happens. This is common Ruy Lopez theory. Bishop to c5, c3, and then sometimes I decide to play queen to f6 here. It's probably not very good. Basically the eval is at +1 now. I bet it goes to like +1.5. But this is actually interesting. This isn't necessarily refuted. Knight to e7 can be played, but it does provide this indirect defense on d4, which can be helpful. So my main piece of advice as white. But by the way, I play this as black. So this is a line that I know well as black. But the ideas I think for white against this very early queen to f6, I think you work around it. I don't think that I think that you play it sort of like you play the canal variation, where you play something like knight to c3 and then d3. I'm not so sure, right? Because on d4 here, pawn takes d4 and white can't take back. Potentially white could play c3 and then pawn takes c3 and then knight takes c3. In the Ruy Lopez line. Yeah, let's take a look. For sure. Bishop to b5, a6, bishop. I mean, people do. The answer is people do definitely play d4, but I'm not sure if it's necessarily that that strong. So in this Ruy Lopez line, bishop to c5, and then c3, and then queen to f6. D4 is, I think, the top line still. Yeah, so d4 is the top line. People often don't play it, and when they don't play it, it's problematic. So d4 here, d4, pawn takes d4, e5, and this is difficult to play as black. Yeah, so I dislike the d4 lines there. They're the one, or I mean, I think they're strong, but I dislike playing against them. Queen g6, c takes d4, and here I think black is basically, I think white is pretty much in good shape. You can play bishop to b4, I guess, but Yeah, pawn takes. Interesting. Yeah, no, so what I'm thinking, Lauren, is basically what I would play is like uh I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. F4 I think could be possible. Sorry, let's go back to the game. But I'm thinking knight to c3, and then I play, especially with h6 though, is super difficult. So I'm thinking like d3, knight to c3, and you play it without, you play the canal type variations without d4. You play knight to d5 basically. So on knight to c3, h6, knight to d5. Yeah, I think that's the right idea. Uh, right. Yeah, no, totally. I completely agree with that, Lauren. I think that's right. I think you get the knight to like d5 and then the queen forced back to d8. D8 and then like d3, bishop to e3, c3 should be good for white in general. So yeah, knight to d5 I think is good, and force the queen back. But yeah, I think that with the queen on f6, d4 becomes more difficult to play. We looked at that Rui Lopez line where d4 is still somewhat is still playable. I'm not making the argument that that's a particularly good line that I play. I get good positions out of it frequently because people don't play optimal moves against it. But I think that that ends up being a good line for white. So d3, bishop to b4, knight d4, c3. Yeah, that's what I would say. I think I would definitely go with knight to d5, and then basically play that knight to d5 against the queen on d8. I think that's good. Yeah, I like that. So, anyways, knight to d5 facing off against the queen on f6. I think that's pretty solid. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, Lauren. Basically, that knight to d5, queen to d8, and then c3 and d4. Here in this game, white plays opts for b4. I think that's a different way to play it. Probably fine. But yeah, this is actually exactly what you're talking. Well, no, thank you, Lauren. No, I really appreciate you asking. It's super helpful. Thank you very much for asking these questions, Lauren. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I think d4 is the way to do this. So yeah, knight to d5, getting the queen back to d8, and yeah, and I like d4 for sure. So, anyways, d4 as opposed to b4 is the thing. So b4 and b4 is good, d4 is best. But yeah, I think you're onto the right idea there. d4, pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, and white is solid. Yeah, no, I think white is just solid here. Like I think that I think that that's standard development, right? This knight to c3, bishop on c4, knight on f3. This will play out well for white, and yeah, d4 instead. d4, pawn takes, castles, and things look good for things look good for white in this situation. So yeah, I think that this is a pretty good refutation of this. Overall, I like the way that Natisse played this. So yeah, d4, just my thinking. b4 is fine too, but d4, as suggested by Lauren and suggested by the engine, I think is objectively a little bit better. We're out of the opening book. Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, you can basically work towards. I mean, basically, it's an expansion on the queen side versus an expansion in the center. With this kind of expansion in the center, this is a a very solid center for white. B4 is sort of something that works towards the towards the queen side expansion, but it doesn't really. It's not really that helpful because the queen side squares are not necessarily as strong as the center squares. Yeah, so I think that b4 is weaker than d4 for the fact that it controls this, basically controls a5 or a5 and c5 as opposed to as opposed to c5 and e5. I mean, having control of the more centralized squares, that's what it's about. So yeah, d4, pawn takes, knight takes, but white has great center control. I thought pawn takes d4 would be better here, to be honest, but... Okay, knight takes instead. I guess knight takes makes sense. I mean, with knight takes, you don't really have any problems with the pawn on b4. So knight takes d4, b5, bishop to b3, queen to h4. Bishop to f. So there's some tactics here. Overall, I like the way that white played this. I think white developed in a very straightforward way. This all looked good. And I think the issues for white happened after, so b5, basically b5 allows this tactic with bishop to f4. Bishop to f4 is just really dangerous. d6, it's particularly dangerous because d6 can't be played. No, thanks for participating, Lauren. It's always really helpful to get for people to like ask the questions that they have. So. Yeah, thanks very much for being here, and thank you very much for asking good questions for the stream. It makes analysis so much more interesting. So yeah, bishop to f4 threatens c7, and then d6 can't be played. If d6, then knight takes c6. But yeah, so b6, bishop to b3, queen to h4. This has got to be incorrect. I can't imagine knight takes c7 would be good for black here. So knight takes c7, king to f8, knight takes a8. I really think white's a lot stronger here. White's basically cemented a strong material advantage. Yeah, no, right. I mean, if you have center control and a space advantage, you might as well launch an attack. Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense to me. But yeah, so yeah, in this situation, where were the improvements for white in this game? I think none of them come before move 7. I think this was a really strong way to play against this queen. Don't really get too nervous or worried about the queen. Just sort of develop naturally. You have the ability to develop naturally. Your opponent doesn't necessarily. Here, I like d4 better than I like b4. d4, basically secures control of the center very, very early. b4 also deflects the bishop, but basically doesn't control the center the same way that d4 does. d4 is given by best as the engine, so I think d4 over b4 in this situation was an improvement. So on 8, d4. So yeah, d4 I think is good. I like that idea. But b4, bishop's pushed back to a7, d4, knight takes, bishop to b5, and white's looking solid. Bishop to f4 I think is the best opportunity for white. The bishop retreat after b5 was a mistake. Yeah, I completely agree. Right, so I think that the bishop to f4 is a stronger play. Bishop to f4 putting pressure on f7 here. So b5 and then bishop to f4 here. And d6 can't be played. On d6, knight takes c6. So that's the idea. Queen to h4, knight takes, pawn takes. Yeah, let's see. So, right. Yeah. I mean, I like that general suggestion. I think that with good tactical sight, this autopilot bishop to b3 move is inferior to bishop to f4. Yeah. So yeah, I like that general idea, Lauren. I think basically if you can do a if you have the opportunity, if you're going to make a retreating move, then it doesn't hurt to take an extra second to look for an attacking move. Makes sense to me. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that that bishop to f4 move is kind of an oversight by white. Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's an error that I make in my own games. Sometimes I play the default just autopilot retreating move in a situation like this. But yeah, Bishop F4, which starts an unrelated attack basically, is objectively much better than Bishop to B3. Sometimes it's really good to be able to shift gears like that. It's definitely strong thinking, strong ideas. So the point that Lauren, so for Natiz, this basically bishop to f4, which shifts gears quickly, is is a superior move to bishop to b3 here. So yeah, interesting. Queen to h4, and basically this knight takes c7 becomes a very early play. Um, I don't know. I actually understand this. I understand this inclination a lot, to be honest. If the pawn is threatening your bishop, it's so easy to just move your bishop, right? Like looking for an attack when you would naturally look for a retreating move against what appears to be a simple threat. Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe. In any case, it's a great instructive point that you're making. So basically, this has a lot of instructional value. If you're getting attacked and you have time and you don't immediately need to make the retreating move, look for the advancing move. This bishop to f4 switches gears quickly, but yeah, this bishop f4 facing bishop to c7, that is definitely improvement to bishop to b3. So yeah, interesting. I just want to go back. So I want to move on to the next game. So I just want to take a look. Yeah, no, I think you're completely in the. I really no, for sure. No, thank you for bringing these up. I completely agree. I think you're making a great point, and I completely agree with it. To be honest, I don't. I feel like I can think of enough games where I have made errors along those lines. So it's excellent advice, not necessarily advice that I'm not necessarily advice that I successfully follow myself 100% of the time, but it's a great framework for thinking about things. So I completely agree with Lauren. I think she's making a great point, and basically I think that if you have a second to look for an attack, it can be helpful to look for that attack as opposed to just playing the kind of thoughtless, just the thoughtless retreating move. The retreating move is basically simple and not difficult to calculate, but sometimes it can be helpful to, as opposed to just playing it by default, looking for an attacking opportunity. Lauren's making a great point. I think she's put it pretty well, and I really agree with that. But I've also made that error many times. It's a very easy error to make in bullet. If you're playing bullet games, you can fall into kind of these kind of defaulted moves that aren't particularly strong. So always good to think about it. Anyways, White got this kind of overwhelming attack, early checkmate. Good job, Natiz. A great game. I'm glad you got that early checkmate. It looked really, you got some very good tactical play off here. Knight to d5, queen to d8, and White is looking fine. Basically d4 I think is better than b4. Yeah, no. So knight takes d4 I think is better than, d4, immediate d4 is a little better than b4. But yeah, bishop to b3, queen to h4, and now you're really getting some good opportunities. Knight takes c7 will cement your material advantage permanently. That has a lot of value. Yeah, overall, I agree. I think that basically White has had excellent tactical opportunities all throughout this game. So yeah. In terms of improvements, I think this was all pretty intuitive. D4 is objectively better than B4. That's one place where I would change this around a little bit. I think that D4 basically, D4, pawn takes D4, pawn takes D4. Having this pawn cemented on D4 and attacking C5 to E5 is more valuable than having this pawn on B4 attacking A5 and C5. having more this basically, it's value of having space in the center versus value of space on the queen side. So I think overall this is a better idea for white. So anyways, that is I think that is objectively better. And but then basically black sort of overextends. So the two moves here that I want to focus on for this game, I think that the d4 over b4 here, it basically controls more valuable squares on the board, c5 and e5. And then your improvement here is on this b5, bishop to f4, a difficult move for me at least to see, but continuing this attack is actually really much better for white than withdrawing his bishop. So bishop to f4 on b5, bishop to f4, and threats on c7 are going to be very powerful for white. So this is a tactical improvement. This is sort of thematically, it's basically on the idea of not making much of an adjustment to your or basically not responding too immediately to the bishop b5, bishop to c4 threat. In this case, continuing your attack and ignoring this threat on the bishop. That was your best tactical opportunity. Very easy to move your bishop though. So it's bishop f4 is an improvement, but the framework of thinking about bishop to f4 is what we've talked about a bit here. And I think that thinking about bishop to f4 and threats that it makes on c7, overall that's going to be a pretty good play. That's better for white than black. So knight to d4, pawn takes d4, and white, eventually white cements a huge lead, and excellent, excellent tactics getting this all together. But this one tactic that was missed is both. There's two things going on here. So I think helpful would be more tactical study. We can all do more tactical study. But this would be an opportunity for this quick bishop to f4 and threats on c7. And then another thing that you can kind of do here is basically that's a good play. So both from a tactical calculation perspective and a thematic perspective of closely consider your retreating moves. Bishop to f4 might have been found. It's a little bit better, it's better than bishop to b3. So this is the second thing that I would change in this game. But I think it's a really good instructive point because it does show the value of continuing attack before playing a reflexive retreating move if you have a solid attack going. Anyways, great game to tease. Really interesting to look at this. Really interesting to look at this situation and to think about these games. I hope that was just generally helpful. But yeah, thank you very much for sending it into tease. Please keep sending your games. Really interesting stuff, and two interesting points on this game: the value of d4 versus b4, and the value of bishop to f4 versus bishop to b3. Thanks for sending it into tease. Appreciate it. Thanks for helping and sending material for the stream. All right, cool. On to the last one for tonight. Last one for tonight is from Subhan. Let's take a look at what his game is. Subhan is playing the Sicilian, and he gets an early bishop to c4. Okay, so this bishop to c4, I think, is generally not very good, to be completely honest. Basically, the issue with bishop to c4 in the Sicilian is that black hasn't played e5 yet. As a result, black can play e6, and then if black immediately plays e6, which he can, this bishop is going to be facing off against a closed file. d5 may also come up, but even with just e6, this bishop has very limited utility on this file. Particularly in some lines of the Sicilian, this problem can get fixed with f4 and f5. So like in the Grand Prix, f4 and f5 can be played, and then that sort of acts as a lever on e6. And then the bishop regains this long file. But bishop to c4, often runs into e6, so it generally leads to an inferior position in the Sicilian. The eval gives this as equalized after e6, and maybe even better than equalized. I mean, it's still suggesting e6 is best move, so e6. No, I mean it is. It's I completely agree with what Lauren is saying, and basically my thinking on that is just you know it's what you're saying is completely correct. But it's a little bit easier said than done is in the main concept, at least for me. I especially in one. I mean, I developed some bad habits from playing in 1 minute games, to be honest. In 1 minute games, it's often just so easy to just like play a retreating move if your piece is getting attacked by a pawn. But this that position in Natise's game was particularly instructive because it showed the value of you know basically continuing an attack while you are getting attacked. So that was interesting. Yeah, no, for sure. No, I completely I completely agree. But it is what you're saying is very fundamentally correct. It's just it's difficult for me to it's you know I know I don't always do that 100% correctly. So gets kind of tricky. But it's fundamentally correct for sure. So very good advice for Natisse is my thinking. Anyways, bishop to c4 runs into this e6, which can block that file. C3, g6, and I think black's looking pretty solid. E6 is good. This, I mean, you know, overall, this whole position for white is just kind of not going like it's basically not. This attack is not continuing. Black has effectively stopped it. So I think this is a good formation for black. And now it's time to go from blocking the attack to pushing these pieces back, ideally with tempo. I think that's your optimal continuation play. So yeah, d5, nice. Okay, so d5 is great. D5, pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, queen e2, and. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think basically white kind of aimlessly attacks f7, and that is not really that. I think basically, yeah, this is a pretty easily refuted attack by white on f7. So a6, pawn takes c6, b3, castles. I think all of this has been good for black. You know, black's basically developed normally. This knight is on g5 kind of aimlessly, and black's going to have good opportunities with yeah. So this quickly shifts towards black's favor, but this yeah, no, it does bounce around a lot. But yeah, castles, knight to f5, knight to h3. This ends up being pretty good for black. Bishop takes h3, knight to f3, and black wins. So yeah, nice. Good stuff. Cool. And yeah, I think just in general, black is solid. I think the bishop to c4 is such an easily met threat. e6 is a move that black would play pretty much without the bishop to c4 there. But it's particularly strong against the bishop on c4. d4, pawn takes d4, d5, pawn takes d5. Black is fine. Knight to e7, a6. No issues, I guess. So yeah, in terms of how black is playing this game, I think that after basically white hangs this pawn on d4, bishop takes f3, and things are going smoothly. Let's see, bishop takes d4 line. I think it's just going to be queen to g5 at the end of this. I just want to make sure. Queen to g5, and white's secured at least a win of another exchange, and has a pawn advantage and a connected pass pawn in the center. So yeah, good stuff for black. I think all of this is good. Yeah. So e6, pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, pawn takes d5. No issues. Yeah. This looks good for black, to be honest. No, I think Subban did a good job. Basically he looked at this bishop to c4 and came up with moves that block it. My inclination would be to play e6 immediately, but it doesn't really matter that much whether e6 is played before or after white starts being fully committed to this attack. I think if white is fully committed to the attack, it's almost more inefficient for white. D5 really sort of threatens this bishop on c4 and creates basically a tempo strong problem. So yeah, D5. Yeah, no, I like D5 too, and I think that this is basically symmetrical pawn structure and better development for black. So makes complete sense. This wasn't. I'm thinking this was an error. Knight to f3 seems to hold on to the d4 pawn. This seems a lot better for white. Ideas here, you could still play. I'm wondering if you could play c5. Probably not. I guess rook to e8's the engine move. That looks right. But yeah. So anyways, I guess. In terms of improving black's game, I think he played a pretty intuitive game. Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is a good idea. I don't think black made it, white made black's life a little bit easy. Black saw that black made an intelligent observation, which is basically this, this early e6 was super helpful for, this early e6 was super helpful for, black, but it effectively shut down that bishop to c4, and worst case scenario, once you've shut down this bishop on c4, there's no problems for black. So yeah, that was key. Finding that e6 was a great idea for black, and then he gets good control of the center here. Good position. And then this tactic was great. This, white hung a pawn, but you exploited it, and bishop takes h3. And then white makes another error, taking that bishop, and you're up a queen. So yeah, to be honest, it's a short game. Yeah, no, I think there's some great tactics. There's some great tactics, Subban, and I think if he just sort of sticks with it, I think this will be good. Yeah. I think Subban's really onto something. Every time I think that you're in a position, Subban, where you're basically, at a fairly early stage in terms of playing chess, just based on your rating. I think that you did it great in this game, but what I would focus on is really improving your tactical study. Really make sure that you're doing an hour or two a day of chess.com Puzzle Battle, chess.com Tactics Trainer, and that'll really be helpful for you, I think. I think that those chess.com, basically, it doesn't have to be chess.com. Those are just the ones that I use. But tactics training for an hour or two a day at your level will really produce results, I think, very quickly. Getting over 1,000, I think, is not, not terribly hard. I think you can do it. And I think that with consistent tactical study, you'll be impressed by how quickly you improve. Overall, in this game, I think you got your tactics really right. In terms of improvements here, you don't really have that many. I think that you played this about how I would have played this, to be honest. Not saying, I mean, you've played a good game here. And then your opponent made tactical errors and you capitalized. So it was a pretty simple game, not a very long game, and yeah, looks like a win. So yeah, thanks for sending it, Subban. Overall, I don't have a whole lot to offer you. I think you played accurately until your opponent erred and you won. That's always good. That's how it should be, basically. You don't make any errors, your opponent errs first, and you capitalize. That's what the grandmasters you're going for. So overall, I think this is I think this is a strong game, Subban. Feel free to send in as many more as you like. Always interesting to look at. And yeah, I think this is a particularly good one. I don't have all that much to add. So yeah, thanks for sending it. I'm gonna wrap up the stream. Next stream is at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning, in about 9 hours from now. Yeah, thank you all very much for being here. Thank you all very much for contributing and participating to the stream. I really appreciate the insights, Lauren. Always very helpful. And thanks very much for everyone. For everyone who sent in and contributed material for the stream. It's really appreciated. And thank you all very much for being here. Have a good night, everyone, or have a good day. And thanks. Thanks very much for being here. Next stream at 8 a.m. Eastern tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.